Good afternoon, and welcome to this panel on impact investing success stories. Almost exactly a year ago, much of the world shut down. We all adapted to a virtual world, and life went on, sort of, and investing went on. Today, it is fair to say the world as we know it has changed, and whether or not the change is irrevocable may still be too early to tell. It is also fair to say that probably every single one of the Sustainable Development Goals has been impacted in some way by the pandemic. SDG 10, inequality, has been thrown into the spotlight, from access to technology right through to how the vaccine will be distributed and to whom. SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, highlighted the frailty of the support systems for casual and gig workers when the world was ordered to stay at home. And obviously SDG 3, health and well-being. We are still all at risk. By pausing, we've had a chance to reflect. And as we return to some kind of normal, we can decide what kind of future we want. For this reason, the World Economic Forum has launched the Great Reset Initiative, a way to right wrongs such as pollution on land or plastic in the sea. And we're here today because transitioning to a more sustainable world requires financing, and impact investing is one way to do it. One of the words that is now frequently associated with the pandemic is resilience. Resilience is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And people have shown themselves to be resilient over the last year. But what about impact portfolios? Has the pandemic proven that impact investing works because it is more than just about risk and return? Or did the wheels fall off? On this panel, I am delighted to have 4 experienced impact investors who will not only discuss how COVID affected their portfolios, but also share their impact success stories, lessons learned, as we explore what the future holds for impact investing and the SDGs. We will be covering 3 main topics: what the pandemic highlighted about impact investing, what sectors or themes have been brought to light, and are we really going back to normal? As a way to get the discussion started, I thought it would be useful for each of our panelists to introduce themselves by describing the specific impact strategy or fund or project that they have been involved with, and one success story that goes with it. We will then have an open discussion on a variety of issues that the pandemic has brought to light. Key to this panel is to learn from our experts. So if you have questions to ask the speakers, please type them into the box, and towards the end, we will have time for Q&A with the audience. Thank you for joining us today. Tomasz, let's start with you. You launched a new private-public program in life sciences in the middle of the pandemic with Commissioner Thierry Breton. I believe it's called the Venture Centre of Excellence. Can you talk a little bit about it and how the pandemic affected it?
Yes, absolutely, Niki. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me and be here. It's my pleasure to represent the European Investment Fund. And thanks so much for a fantastic introduction. So I don't need to talk about the EIF, everybody knows what my institution represents. So glad to jump directly into the substance. But maybe for the background, EIF is a prime fund of fund investor in Europe. We are operating on a pan-European basis, and we have a decade of experience investing in social impact ventures. We have a plethora of SDG aligned strategies, including impact. And as part of our endeavor, we are very interested to look into the partnerships, because we do believe that ultimately what the pandemic has proven is that institutions, organizations cannot do things alone. And in particular, in the SDG relating to health, we've been already designing this program prior to COVID, but COVID actually exacerbated the need for it. And Venture Centre of Excellence, which was launched last year with collaboration with the European Commission, it's about open innovation. It's about open innovation platform that is set up on a pan-European basis, that is aggregating and bringing into around one table a number of players. These are the venture capital funds that are working in life sciences sector, both in digital health, therapeutics, and medtech. At the same time, is bringing as well the corporates, European corporates predominantly, working in these sectors, to bring them together and collaborate for the first time on a systemic basis across European borders. And of course, there will be a lot of syndication activities, a lot of partnerships that will be created and spearheaded by this collaboration. And ultimately, this all is possible because we've tried to kind of see with the European Commission how they can help. And indeed, the whole program is around 250 million euro of the firepower that we've introduced to the market. We are right now lining up a lot of VC firms that operate in the sector and also corporates that are eager to join in this first kind of European partnership. And this, of course, addresses the SDG of health, but also, SDG 17, which you didn't mention, Niki, in your introduction, which is very, very important. It's about bringing people together. It's bringing people from private and public sector into various collaborations. So we do believe that this type of fostering of deal flow, of investment sharing will bring dramatic results. We need to kind of bear in mind that Europe is a home to a fantastic number of startups, but they do not have enough firepower, enough scale-up finance to really develop. And this is exactly where the corporates come in. Corporates so far were not been that very active in investing in life science and actually health. And we want to change it. We want to bring in at a pan-European basis. So we have launched that in 2020, and we are right now starting investment activity. So we're still open to accommodate a number of investors, of course, who are willing to join us, that are willing to contribute to the overall project. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Now I think we'll sort of bring in Justina. Until the pandemic, much of the narrative was about climate change, net zero, the energy transition. But one thing we've realized that society as a whole has been upended. How is this playing out with social focused investors, and what benefits can we see?
Thank you again for the introduction. And so I don't have to spend a lot of time telling you about Triodos Investment Management. I manage our financial inclusion funds within Triodos Investment Management. And to be able to answer your question, Niki, I think it's good to go back a step back and see what has happened in terms of knowledge, in terms of lessons learned, and then look forward and see what we've learned and can do or can change. And that's where my success story also is. So if you go back to last year, what really happened the first quarter of 2020, March 2020, was we realized that the system was broken. We saw that quite a lot of our investee companies, our financial inclusion players, intermediaries that we work with, were hit with liquidity problems. They had problems with finding their partners that they normally used to work with. They were hit with moratoriums, sometimes government-led, sometimes because their clients were asking for these moratoriums. So we actually experienced that with them, and we realized that we needed to act fast. And the good thing is, and the success story really in this crisis, is that we've seen that financial inclusion investors, MIVs, microfinance investors, have learned from previous crises, and we knew that we needed to act fast to be able to keep our intermediary financial institutions active. So what actually happened quite soon after this realization is that the MIVs came together, set up a memorandum of understanding to work together and have similar definitions on how we look at balance sheets of financial institutions that we invest in. If you are working with a financial institution and you know that if that financial institution is also funded by another investor, such as ourselves, then it's really useful to be coordinated in your message and in your help and in your liquidity provision to this financial institution rather than going at it alone. That's a lesson we've learned, and that's a lesson that has been applied through this crisis. And I'm happy to say that we've really been successful in keeping the market going. But now that we've gone through that process, because of course the liquidity issue was the most dire and most urgent, where do we go from there? Because we've actually realized, and this has been realized by other organizations as well. If you may have read the IMF has said that the COVID crisis has set back economic activity 10 years in time. The GDPs are at the level of 2012. So what is the role of impact investors, and how do we go from there? We, from Triodos Investment Management, actually think that we should not go back to the old normal. We should not go back to what we used to think was the great world. Because if anything, the COVID crisis has actually been able to show us that there is a lot of inequality. There's a lot of social issues, social inequalities. Niki, can you hear me? Because I see,
No. I can hear you. That's great.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Because I thought you wanted to say something. To go back to what I was saying, our conclusion is that we should not go back to normal because normal was not ideal. We should create a world as impact investors that is sustainable. And if anything, the COVID crisis has showed us that the world is full of social inequalities. The world is skewed in the way we behave towards nature, and therefore, the next steps that we take as investors need to be well thought out of. We should come together as impact investors and other investors and mainstream investors and really redefine what we think should be the new normal.
I think that's a perfect place to sort of stop because that's exactly one of the questions we're going to look at. What does new normal look like? And so
Exactly.
you've got lots of exciting things to share. I think, should we bring in Ed? I believe you've got a couple of energy transition funds. In the long term, this is a sector for thematic success, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what happened to them in 2020.
Sure. Well, we have two funds that our group runs. One is the Energy Transition Fund, and the other is our Environmental Absolute Return Thematic Fund, or EARTH. The first really focuses on themes relating to energy transition and decarbonization, looking at companies globally that are contributing to solutions for those problems. And then the other fund looks at that too, but also deals with broader ecological issues, broader environmental considerations, natural capital considerations, also on a global basis. That's a long-short fund. So those are the funds. Well, what happened in 2020? Well, it was 2020, of course, was a year marked by a very aggressive sell-off in March and then a very strong rebound later on in the year, largely through central bank liquidity stimulus. And we've seen capital markets move faster all the time, particularly sell-offs. Partly that's due to the rise of the machine. But in terms of how the pandemic and the sell-off in 2020 and the subsequent stimulus affected our strategies and the outlook, I would say that it highlighted the sensitivity of supply chains during the sell-off, and in some cases also access to funding and balance sheet strength. Those that weren't going to have the cash flow right away to meet their needs. So those are some, I think, points of fragility that were maybe not, or maybe underappreciated before. And I think going forward, I think people will think more about that, think more about local supply chains, for example. I don't think people will take the resilience of those things for granted. So I think resiliency was a big theme that wasn't thought up enough, probably in the past, that was highlighted in March. And then on the stimulus side, what we found was that a lot of governments decided to enact kind of the necessary stimulus for economies by greening economies. So we've seen big policy moves across the world this last year, not just in the EU, but also China, now the USA, potentially India as well, all with this idea of sort of building back better and greening our economies. So that provides a very strong structural outlook for our companies at one level, and certainly benefited them last year as well. After the first quarter shakeup, we actually had a pretty resounding rebound in most of our sectors, actually. And I'd say generally, though, the experience from last year of the pandemic has been one that reinforces the idea that existential issues are best not ignored. Here in part, I'm of course thinking of Trump and him saying repeatedly that everything's under control and it's going to be just fine. And they need to be dealt with head on, quickly, and with collaboration. These are excellent lessons for climate change, really, and hopefully bolster the outlook for green initiatives globally as we head into COP26 this November in Glasgow.
Thank you. And last but not least, we've got Theo, who can't join us visually, but I believe you're on the phone. You launched a microfinance fund in India just before lockdown, I believe. Can you tell us a bit about how this survived pandemic and lessons learned and success stories? Do you have Theo? I don't know whether Theo can join us. So I tell you what, I'm going to just jump in while we reconnect with Theo and open up the discussion a little bit to the wider audience. We've all touched on a few themes that have affected us, well, you guys that have affected your funds. But what I'd like to do is sort of bring them all together in a sort of quasi list, sort of for our audience to sort of start seeing a checklist of what trends and activities has the pandemic accelerated and what activities and trends has the pandemic slowed down. I mean, we've already talked, Ed mentioned supply chains, but if we can sort of popcorn and discuss what has been accelerated first, what trends and themes have been accelerated due to the pandemic? Justina, I see you nodding. Shall I start with you?
Well, yeah, I was nodding, and at the same time, I was also thinking about how best to answer this question, because of course, there have been so many changes, and you can look at them from an internal perspective to say, as an impact investor, what kind of changes have we made to our investment processes, for example, or our investment focus. But you can also look at it from a more global perspective and see what has the pandemic really brought to light in terms of trends. And one big one is that we see a very big or high interest in impact investing or in sustainability as a whole. So there's a big movement of individuals, companies, governments, non-governmental organizations that have, that are now active in one way or another in sustainability or impact investing. So that's a good one. Another one is sort of a concern, or rather something that we are looking at as impact investors and Triodos in particular, that we should be careful not to throw good money after bad money. It's great to have this enthusiasm to do good, but we need to be very careful about the choices that we make in terms of reaching the SDGs, but in terms of choosing the right investments to make because of their sustainability profile. So that's another one that we are quite cautious about and looking at. And a third one, and my last one, is what all of that has done with the scrutiny at which we look at investments from an impact perspective, but also from a risk perspective. There's a heightened or enhanced risk management that has come up because, of course, of all the cloudiness that has been created by moratorias and restructurings and what have you, and at the same time also the wish and the need to really focus on putting good money to good use.
Thank you. Does anyone, Tom or Ed, do you have a couple of trends that you want to share that have accelerated?
Well, I can jump in with the AF experience on this. Also picking up what was said before a bit, which is it is true that we can see more and more interest in the impact investing, and just give you a couple of numbers on this. We started impact investing in 2013, so a couple of years ago, and then we have been receiving more or less around 5-6 applications from fund managers per annum. And last year, 2020. We've received more than 35 proposals, and actually much more even than the year before pandemic. So you can actually see that fund managers, both established managers and the new teams are popping up. And this particularly is actually triggered by additional interest from the institutional investor side. So I think I can confirm that this is actually developing rather than slowing down. And I think people are already understanding more and more that you don't have truly a return if you don't account for externalities, because it's very easy to post big PLN numbers, whereas, the negative impact like is somewhere else, followed by general public or elsewhere. So I think genuinely there is this more awareness of pushing people into investing responsibly. When we look at our portfolio of impact funds, we were also interested in a way which funds or which part of the portfolio are actually negatively affected, which are positively affected. And ultimately we have come out that only 35% of the portfolio of our funds are negatively affected. The remaining part of the portfolio is either no change or ultimately it's actually better performing than before COVID. And what we can see, what really is driving these results is a particular field. We have a number of investments when you look through the portfolio in education. So EdTech, this is something that is popping up very prominently. Of course, biotech, healthcare, digital health solutions. We see a lot acceleration on ICT and digitalization of business models. This is pretty much, I think we are like 5-6 years, fast forward if the pandemic didn't hit. Food tech, a lot of food security. So that this is kind of, we have a boom in terms of proposals that we receive in that particular area. And of course, all the solutions that relate to e-commerce and something that, of course, as was said before, touch upon the value chains and the way enterprises do operate. So this is pretty much a nutshell of what we're actually seeing and what's getting us accelerated and where the themes actually are going forward.
Brilliant. Before I bring in Ed, we have a question from the audience. Tomasz, could you repeat the number of applications that you received in 2020? Gaspar
yes,
asked that.
Right, we received more than 35 applications. And we typically, it's not that we because we have, EIF, it's a fund of fund, we operate on a pan-European basis. We have visibility on a quite big part of the European investment scene. So that's just part relating to impact. It is not counting all the other strategies which are SDG aligned. Then we receive hundreds of proposals, but for a very focused and narrowly defined field, as we do define impact investing, this is actually the number, and it's not bad. So far, we've invested, just to compare, since 2013 in around 25 funds. So we are quite selective. 25% of the deal flow is something that goes through EIF assessment process.
That's brilliant. Ed, I'd like to bring you back in because you were the one who sort of triggered my idea of asking for trends and themes, and you were talking about supply chains. What other trends and themes have you seen through your funds that have really been accelerated by the pandemic?
Well, generally, greening themes as a corpus have been accelerated through policy, but there's other things too. We've seen an acceleration in related ESG ETF inflows, quite consistent, really markedly strong, still to this day. New company issuance in environmental solutions, lots of new companies coming to market, solution providers, very exciting. But also much more engagement from existing corporates, new pilot projects that they're embarking on to find new ways to green their operations. All things like finding new ways to create steel using hydrogen as a reductant instead of carbon to decarbonize steel production, finding new ways to create fertilizer, displacing LNG with non-fossil fuel inputs. Lots of exciting stuff. Behind all of this, we see it's no surprise really that they're focusing on these things, because we see the rising specter of carbon pricing relentlessly going up. Even when the markets have sold off, carbon pricing has still been pretty strong and making new highs. They know this is going to mean that they're going to have to spend more money, and they have to figure out how to get ahead of this, and that means decarbonizing. So we definitely see strength there. In terms of particular other themes, like we see a rise in digitalization. We know everything's going to be electrified, so a lot more focus on the grid, last mile delivery, logistics. People have been ordering lots of stuff for delivery as they don't go out for their house. Of course, remote learning, that's going to transform educational models, potentially very exciting for a system that's hundreds of years old. What slowed down? I mean, obvious stuff, I guess: leisure and hospitality, audience-driven activities, the arts, of course, transportation. And hopefully we'll start to see some normalization here as vaccine rollouts pick up pace and economies reopen.
Thank you. So you brought in a few of the slowdowns. Tomasz, Justina, do you have any sort of slowing themes that you want to add to that? I mean, obviously the leisure industry, hospitality and transport. We'll come back to what might not come back at all, but slowed down.
Well, perhaps what we also see, because we obviously invest in financial institutions, financial intermediaries in emerging markets, they obviously have had they've experienced quite a lot of restrictions in terms of mobility. Because they are generally financial institutions where people come in to pay their monthly payments, and also some of them are not highly digitalized. We see that the normal banking procedures, or the normal old-fashioned banking, is actually moving away, and there is more move towards digital banking. Or that has been accelerated. Of course, it has already been it has been a movement that's been around for a while, but it's been accelerated because of COVID, because of mobility restrictions. So you see that these financial institutions are digitalizing very quickly, sometimes together with fintechs, sometimes just themselves from within. So yeah, the slowing down is really the old-fashioned banking, and acceleration is really the digitalized financial services.
Great. Tomasz?
Well, I think maybe a different perspective on this. We see a bit some different behavior with our fund managers. It used to be like investing in these high growth companies with a huge cash burn and a kind of asking for more and more. I think what we've observed through our discussions with our fund managers is that more and more focus is really put on resilience. It is really whether the company can have recurring source of revenues, can actually have cash flows in the near future, not some 10 years after, and go for the wide growth and actually not looking at the fundamentals. So sound business models. I think this is something that we are seeing. So companies that have really opportunity to go through a longer financial runway, not the ones who have just the money for the next 6 months and then need to have additional 10 million around. But essentially the ones who are already been growing in the scale-up phase. This is where the issue comes, because ultimately to reach additional milestones in the VC life cycle, they need to get additional money. They need to get tens of millions of euros oftentimes. And this is where the problem arises. Sometimes these companies need to pivot, need to redefine themselves. And before they can be exited, they need to be held for a number of times. And this is where this money is actually missing. And this is where actually, member states and also investors like us had to provide additional top-up facilities in order not to destroy the value that has been created and been disrupted by COVID. Because one of the elements that portfolio companies are bringing up, there may be winners and losers, but there's a disruption. Disruption in the sense that it takes more time to go to the milestone that all the investors had in mind. And then you need to make a decision what to do, which companies to support. Are you going for the new ones, or you need to kind of support the existing jewels in your portfolio? So these are these trade-offs that we've seen our GPs had, and that's actually a good one. This trade-off was because it was kind of putting into the mindset not only chasing new but also focusing on the current portfolio to not to destroy the value that has been created over these years. But these are all the issues that we actually face today, and the fact of fundraising on the side of the GPs and fundraising on the side of the portfolio companies as such is one of the top two concerns after, of course, clients, because the client retention, you need to sell, you need to kind of have your business, and COVID disrupt this client stability. And in some cases, like Ed mentioned, business is actually not viable anymore and had to be either liquidated or need to pivot. So I think, in some sense, the COVID has actually exacerbated certain weaknesses in certain business models and areas, and which is good per se for the bigger economy, maybe not good for the short-term employment, but for bigger economy, is a repositioning of capital flows from something that is already a passé, would not work anymore, for something that, there's a new business model, a new logic of doing business in the next decade. And I think this next decade is going to be very transformational unless we sleep over it. We shouldn't sleep over it. And I think this is where the core effort should be. Next decade will be deciding where we end up in all the policies and areas that we are chasing. The next decade is crucial. And I think the imperative is to think and how to collaborate in order to get there.
Actually, that segues perfectly. We have a question from Jacob Hone, who actually created the video that was played yesterday. All the Phenix events, they do this amazing video, and it's something about being too late. We've got to do it now. We can't wait for another decade. Anyway, Jacob's question, which is kind of pretty much our theme, is how are your organizations determining what constitutes a success story, and how do you collect and share these stories? So I think that's perfect for each of you to sort of highlight and pretty much answer the theme of this exact panel. So how are your organizations determining what constitutes a success story, and how do you collect and share these stories? Ed, do you want to start?
Sure. I don't think that we really have a central committee that reviews what the success stories are and why. A success story, but we kind of know what they are, and certainly we're communicating with our investors. And, managers are aware of some good investments. If I were to highlight some things, I would say, a success story is something that not just makes money, return that's gone up. That's helpful since we are in the investment business, but it's also something that really makes a difference. And I can't talk about companies, but we've had some. Where we've gone into primary transactions, given money to companies to put in the ground and build things that have had great impact on various environmental issues. So we view those as success stories. How do we communicate that? Sorry, it's my phone. There we go. Good. So we publish a quarterly sustainability report for all of our investors. And in that, not only do we give various ESG characteristics, we go through a variety of other numbers where we can get them: carbon, waste, water, pollution, recycling, green energy produced. But we try to give a flavor for where the portfolio is invested, and that includes some highlights. We like to highlight a company or two each quarter where we talk about the kind of meaningful work that they're doing, and we also like to highlight, make sure we highlight at least one young company every quarter that's doing something novel to get the word out there and to just show our investors what we're actually doing, so they can feel part of the journey, part of the solution, as we really try to direct capital towards solution providers that are making a difference.
Thank you. Justina?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, success stories and how we talk about them. For us, I think, and we know we don't have a committee that picks out which ones are success stories and which ones aren't. But a success story would be an investment that hits the impact, risk, and return boxes. So it has to be an investment or a portfolio that is reaching our impact goals. I am specifically involved in social inclusion, so that our impact goals are specifically on SDGs such as SDG 1, no poverty, those kind of SDGs. And at the same time, it has to be a financial institution that is providing the right balance between risk and return. One of our fintech or digital financial institutions in India has doubled its size in 2020, and at the same time remained very well managed from a credit risk point of view. So they've got a very healthy portfolio. They've doubled their size. They've been actually able to provide financial services to those that are unserved or underserved during the COVID crisis. So this would be a success story, CoinWorks, for example. But there are many others like this one in our portfolio. And yes, we do have an impact report that we have on our website. It's an interactive report that you can actually go to, and it allows you to go to the specific place, country, company, and sometimes you may even find a story or a video. So we're quite proud of our success stories, and we invite you to go to our website and have a look.
I think you'll find Jacob will like the idea of stories and videos because that's his his forte.
Yeah.
Tomasz, thank you, Justina. Tomasz, how about you?
Yes, I think very, very similar to other colleagues. Plenty of videos, plenty of stories, and I think we cannot underestimate the importance of highlighting what works and why it works. So I think this is what we try to do, and it's as I said, it goes beyond what multiple on cost was for the investors, but really we as EIF have our proprietary impact methodology, and we try to really when you communicate on impact to be very, very factual, because there's plenty of successes that are kind of highlighted oftentimes, but really we want to kind of go systematic, really seeing what was set at the very beginning, what was achieved, what was the multiple of the impact, not also multiple of cost, aggregated across the companies, portfolio companies, across the portfolios of funds, and also at our level. So I think this is something that we are proud to do in order to be communicating accurately with respect to what's achieved. And oftentimes, it is sometimes doesn't work as intended, but fair enough. Most likely, and most often it works. But in addition, because we are public institution, we are public-private partnership by definition with European Commission as shareholders, EIB, and other financial institutions, public and private. And being a fund of fund manager, for us, success story goes, of course, beyond the portfolio companies level. It's also about ecosystem building. It's about creating this institutional layer of actors, partners that work across borders to do what actually colleagues have highlighted. So for us, also successes are, for instance, bringing up the new fund managers into life, helping them fundraise the first fund, helping them catalyze additional private investment into these funds in order for them later on to be fully independent and fundraise for the strategy as equal to equal with the normal monetary type VCs that we see all around. So I think this is something that EIF is proud of catalyzing across European borders. And of course partnerships. We try to kind of bring people together. We've been hearing a lot about partnerships being created. You may have heard Battery Alliance, Hydrogen Alliance, all of these alliances, but truly there is something behind that. These partnerships must be created, these partnerships must be exemplified, and these are also success stories. But they will only make sense if there's a value creation. Value creation inside, there are particular incentives for the partners to team up, and there is a tangible benefit to be shared across the various constituencies that form this partnership. But we are also exemplifying these partnerships as one of our success stories. So ecosystem level, fund manager level, portfolio company level, the whole ecosystem must work. We just cannot kind of show only one fragmented picture. Otherwise, we're missing a very big landscape of what needs to be happening in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. You did mention earlier that one of the hardest SDGs to quantify and that people don't talk about so much is this idea of SDG 17 and partnerships for the goals and everything. Does anyone else want to sort of share how 2020 has accelerated the sort of collaborative element, partners they may not have ever worked with or thought of working with, or any other partnership that has come up because of the way we've had to work in this new environment?
Well, I earlier mentioned this memorandum of understanding between microfinance investment vehicles. Obviously, these are companies or organizations that work together quite often because we are investing for the same goal. But what COVID-19 has done is also brought us together and closer to each other, to work together because there are no other options. This has the same, and that was because at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, but it's also continuing now going forward because we realize that some of these travel restrictions have shown us that we do not have to go to the same investee individually to ask the same questions for the same purposes, but just for different companies. So collaboration has really increased among impact investors that are active in social inclusion. In addition to that, one of the funds that I manage is a fund that was set up by the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. And we do say that one of the SDGs that we actually hit with investing or with our investments through the Sapphire Fund is SDG 17. And that's quite a claim, knowing that a lot of social investors do not want to go there because it's not, it's not an easy one to how do you say that, to substantiate. But one of the reasons we say this is because this fund actually does bring together not only financial institutions, but the idea is to transform the financial system so that you have financial institutions that are focused on the real economy and are focused on people, planet, and profit. They are not, how do you say that, social ventures only, but they also want to make a return. And these financial institutions, when they are strengthened, you are also creating collaboration within the financial system, and therefore also in strengthening the social fabric. So I would say specifically with this fund and the network that backs the fund, the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, and the theory of change that it has to strengthen financial institutions, we actually do contribute to strengthening societies.
Thank you. Ed, do you have any view on partnerships, or shall I jump into the next question?
Please jump to the next question. I don't want to be speaking.
No, Ed, I was just asking Ed.
Oh, there's not a lot for me to add. We have a pretty tight-knit small group. I don't think it really changed our practice so much, although it did enable us to have more touch points actually with both companies and investors. Is the idea of doing everything digital was socialized, even site visits, to be honest. Instead of getting on a plane or a train, we've just actually managed to have more efficient flow of information and exposure.
Brilliant. I don't know where the day is going, but I'm going to sort of touch on the new normal and see if we can sort of share our views. First one for each of you is, are we going back to the old normal, or what one or two things do you think will be in the new future going forward post-pandemic? I'll start with you, Ed.
Well, I guess it's always going to be a little bit of both, isn't it? There'll be some things that don't go all the way back, and some things will start to revert. What will stick? Hopefully we'll have more global cooperation around universal existential issues. I think that's the main one that I'd like to see, and specifically more preparedness for the next pandemic, which is very important. Because the reality is, as biodiversity losses continue, as human settlement continues to concentrate in a warming world, where more and more insects, amongst other things, can migrate out of typical boundaries to other ones, disease will spread. So this is something where we have to stay vigilant. What's something else that sticks? I think that actually we will get more thinking about localization of supply chains, just so that we're not at risk. And I think we got taught that lesson actually not only through the coronavirus, but also through the Suez Canal recently. So, this idea of just having multiple suppliers, not sourcing everything from another country, having some stuff that's local, that matters. That matters also, vaccine production, right? I mean, people are going to want to have strategically, going to want to have their own localized vaccine production facilities. It'll be interesting to see how much people go back to the office. I think one thing that'll stick is everybody will start to get used to maybe having a day or two, depends on the industry, of course, but a day or two per week working from home. I think that this idea of remote working is now normalized in a way that would never be before. It'd always be looked down upon. Now I think it's going to be normalized. I think it's going to be very interesting. This is the last thing I'll say, because I guess one could just speculate for a long time about this stuff. But it'll be quite interesting also to see how educational business models change going forward. I think, or just the educational models. That'll be very interesting.
Tomasz, what's your take on this? The new normal?
Well, I'm actually, I thought about that, regardless of our interview, but I'm far from kind of, being, far from dividing our continuum of time between before or after. Because you can, this is an event that happened, right? So we have COVID, so it's a very good conceptual model. What was before, what is after? And before we had what? Financial crisis. Before financial crisis, after financial crisis. And I guarantee you we will have another one in number of years' time, and we will ask what was before and what is after. So I think what we are sitting on, frankly speaking, using the John Ecklington comparison, we are sitting on a gray swan. Everybody knows about black swan, which is an event that happened out of sudden, very improbable, but happens with a very high impact in a sense, right? And people say nobody could have foreseen that. And this is what we know as a black swan. So one can say COVID was a black swan, but frankly speaking, when you look into these things, it's a kind of something that was incubating for already some time, and people were talking about it. Gates was talking about it. Such a thing will come. Let's get prepared. No, because of myopic view, we neglect certain things, and then you actually have what you have. And there will be a number of I would say legs of this myopic view. Because we are not learning from the past, and I think unless miracle happens, we will continue to have this kind of black swans going forward. But what Ecklington is saying is that we should turn it around in a sense, and to look at really the world problems as they emerge, and figure out solutions to these huge issues, solutions which ultimately are fueled by technology, because we have various powerful technologies developments, and they are interlinked, and they are powered themselves to create positive exponentials, as he is saying, in order to really address these issues. So a lot needs to be done in the next decade in order to be there for CO2 reductions, greenhouse reductions in 2050, because ultimately without the work that we need to do right now, things will happen. So I would not think that that we can divide the world in before after. For sure, there will be changes, as Ed has highlighted. For sure, people would actually see that availability is actually most or more important than the price, because look at the vaccination campaign in Europe. We have negotiated as European Union good prices. However, we are at the back of the queue, and then now we are a bit, shoveling back, which boils a bit into a strategic sovereignty, and this is a bit of more policy view. Well, countries, Europe, as such, we need to think about the independence as well, how to kind of self-contain certain supplies of critical materials. It's not only with respect to at the beginning was masks. We didn't have masks. We didn't have tests. Where are the productions? In China, right? So we need to localize. But there will be also for other things. Batteries, where the lithium is, somewhere else. How can we in-source? Where are the big plants? Well, somewhere else where we can in-source. So I think there is this spark of awareness. Guys, I think the world is a bit different right now, and we need to make sure that the key elements that are necessary for the future good growth actually are there, and we can have some control or plan for them, and not kind of say, well, somehow, some way we will get through. When there's a problem, we'll address it. I think we need to anticipate these issues, and I think this maybe self-awareness of anticipation should spark a number of positive change.
Thank you. I think that's preparedness that Ed was talking about. Now, Justina, I know this is your favorite subject. So what will the new normal look like from your point of view?
Yes, it's my favorite subject, but it's also my son's favorite subject. He's a teenager, and he wants nothing other than going back to normal, because then he can see his friends, he can, social life can start again. But really, on a serious note, going back to normal is a big thing, and I disagree that we can't how do you say that, divide the world into the world that was and the world that will be because of this one event. I actually think this is a pivotal moment to do or to make those decisions. So if you ask me whether we are going back to normal, I will say it depends, because I think we are able to define whether or not we want to go back to normal. And especially investors who are moving financial resources to invest in one or the other are defining how the future will look like. So it's not going to happen by itself. It's really going to be on the basis of the investment decisions that we make. And if that is the case, then I think that we can, we can state that we can also decide to go to a totally different kind of world. It's perhaps a bit more idealistic, but I prefer to be just a mix of idealistic and practical, knowing that the ideal requires transition. Meaning that financial institutions are also a key player in this transition, and impact investors, whether you're investing in financial inclusion or you're investing in the energy transition or in food, in agriculture, you're making choices that define how the new normal will look like. So yes, we will go somewhere, but I prefer that we do not go back to the old norm.
Don't tell your son that. Okay, so we've got 6 more minutes. I don't have any other questions. So before we properly formally wrap up, I'd like to ask each one of you what your key takeaway would be from 2020, or a recommendation. So our audience are a mixture of investors, quite a lot of investors, and some managers, but ultimately, what is the one key takeaway from your different angles that you would hand to them as a sort of, this is what 2020 was about? Ed, I'm staring at you. You need your mic. Ed, your mic.
I don't know how that happened. Sorry, there we go. I am back. So 2020, what was it really about from my standpoint? The key thing from 2020 was the seismic shift we saw, seismic and really steady shift we saw towards the global community embracing sustainability. We saw this at the policy level, not just Europe, but Asia as well, now the US. We saw it in flows, and the ETF flows, which are dramatic. They're continuing as millennials come of age and get more money. We also saw it on the negative side in terms of climate news, like the California wildfires, reminding us just how pressing and persistent this issue is. It's going to continue from here. So, that really stands out, because I think the world is now opened up, is really united around this theme in a way that it hasn't in previous years. I think finally it feels like the climate skeptics have been silenced a bit. It feels more fringy now. It's not a balanced conversation anymore. Honestly, it hasn't been a balanced conversation for a long time, but they've managed to still sort of slow down the rate of change, and certainly at the policy level, and all that feels like it's changed, which is great. It doesn't, however, solve the problem. So looking out from here, I would just tell everyone that there's still a heck of a lot of work that needs to be done, and you can make a difference as an individual with how you invest and how you think about allocating. So I encourage people to try to become a part of the solution, however they can do it at an individual level.
Thank you. Tomasz, what is your key takeaway to give to our audience of 2020?
I think, Niki, this is how you've started with your question on SDGs. Which SDGs were the most impacted? And I can view from this perspective that Well, impacted means, well, that there are issues, that these SDGs were at risk, but ultimately, this COVID showed where we need to invest. There is, from my standpoint, saying about how SDGs were impacted, actually saying where there is an investment opportunity in order to create value. So for me, when I look at this, SDGs is like a North Star for what needs to be done as a business plan for investors to be operationalized. So ultimately, where money should go in order to as well make a return, because ultimately, what we were talking about, various sectors, health, edtech, etc. Right? So if there is a need, there is a bit of a product solution. Well, that generates of course value added for society, and value added, which is the financial value added. So ultimately, where people kind of ask, where is the place to invest? Well, look at the SDGs, and ultimately look for these solutions, look for these technologies, for these business models that ultimately address it, because ultimately this is what is needed. This is ultimately what people will be paying for as well, right? So I think this is actually a North Star of where investment activity should be done. But it's not just on the declarations. One thing is, of course, we talk about redirection of flows of capital, and we just act on the intrinsic awareness of people. We know that it takes ages in order to kind of be a mainstreaming impact vis-a-vis what we have. It needs to be done, but will take ages. But regulatory bodies, member states, countries need to do something more about it. It's not about only regulation, but also, just kind of very prosaic thing like accounting. In the past, we have invented this double entry system, but it's very inferior because it doesn't account for externalities. Once you account for externalities, well, guess what? Investors will line up or companies will not, because it hits the P&L. So we need to create this, I think, additional systemic levers in order to speed up. We should not only rely on intrinsic feeling good, feeling well about doing something. It's important, but it will not be sufficient to move a needle on a global scale.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And Justina, and last but not least, what is your key takeaway?
I see that there's not much time. Yeah, what's my key takeaway from 2020? I think what we have seen, it's actually it looks like a miracle almost, that financial analysis and risk management goes hand in hand with impact investing and impact management. And why am I saying that? If you look at our portfolios, we're glad to see that there is a lot of resilience in our portfolio, not just in our portfolio, but in the financial inclusion sector as a whole. So we see that our portfolio companies are well capitalized. They are managing through this whole pandemic, and it's a good thing to be able to recognize, because we've been saying this for quite a while. Don't get blinded just by returns. Look at the balance between impact, risk, and return. And I think that message has become clearer now. On SDGs, I agree. I agree with Tomasz that you should follow the movements between now and the coming years. And for us, financial inclusion and microfinance is a super career. We do not specifically exclude certain SDGs that we don't touch, because social inclusion really touches so many aspects of society. Towards the investors, I would say, please take a moment to think about the kind of world you'd want to live in, because it's really on you. It's your decision what kind of world there will be in 10 years, 20, 25, 50 years. It's your decision.
What a wonderful note to end on. Tomasz, Justina, Ed, thank you very much. I'm so sorry we couldn't get Theo, and I hand back to Manuel.
Thank you so much, Niki. And in the interest of time, I will leave it there. These were already 3 great summaries. But I do believe I should do a special shout out to the one panel member that unluckily couldn't make it because of technical problems. And that was Theo Brouwers, Head of Impact Investing at ACTIAM. I'm naming him because, he should have participated in the discussion, and not only because ACTIAM is a sponsor to this event, but also because I've so much enjoyed working with Theo when I was still one of his colleagues more than 6 years ago. So thank you all. Thank you, Niki, for moderating this, and we'll go on to our next keynote. Cheers.